Good afternoon, and welcome to our WHAM Virtual Forum, The Silent Gap and the Loud Opportunity. We chose this title because for many years, we've known that women's health research has been underfunded and women have been understudied and underrepresented in research and in clinical trials. Yet women represent 52% of the population, make 85% of spending decisions, and drive 80% of healthcare decisions for their families. My focus and passion for women's health began years ago while, as an entrepreneur, I learned how to identify overlooked market opportunities and to turn them into strong, successful businesses. And for over 20 years, while participating on the board of the Breast Cancer Research Foundation from its early beginnings, I saw firsthand the transformative power of world-class research and the impact of marketing on creating not only awareness, but action that it can impact patient outcomes, particularly of a disease, especially breast cancer in that case. That experience opened my eyes to the enormous gaps in women's health and how those gaps directly shape women's diagnosis, treatment, and outcomes. That realization propelled the launch of WHAM, Women's Health Access Matters, a nonprofit created by a group of leading businesswomen in 2020, determined to disrupt the status quo by creating greater awareness, addressing the funding gap and historical exclusion of women, and partnering with economists, scientists, investors, and business leaders to drive innovation and demonstrate the economic opportunity for change. Today, we're bringing the entire women's health ecosystem together: researchers, clinicians, investors, business leaders, and philanthropists in a format that opens the doors wider than ever before. By gathering virtually, we're ensuring that more voices, more disciplines, and more ideas shape the future of women's health research and investment. And I am most grateful for the tremendous participation of so many of WHAM's partners and collaborators whose commitment and focus on shifting this landscape continues to inspire and propel us forward. We know that accessibility accelerates impact, and this forum is designed to do exactly that. From day one, WHAM rooted itself in data, collaboration, and actionable solutions. Our goal has never been simply to raise awareness. It has been to generate evidence that drives investment in research and innovation and better outcomes for us all. To quantify the opportunity, we commissioned the RAND Corporation in 2020 to produce the foundational research underlying the WHAM reports, focusing initially on 4 major disease areas that affect women across the lifespan: autoimmune disease, brain health, cancer, and cardiovascular disease. The findings were profound and confirmed that investing in research focused on women generates far greater returns than anyone had anticipated. Doubling women-focused NIH investment in just these 4 areas, an increase of only about $350 million, would yield $14 billion in economic returns. In heart disease alone, that increased investment could save nearly $2 billion in healthcare costs. For the first time, these numbers changed the conversation from one about inequities to one about economic impact. It sparked a wave of analysis across policy, philanthropy, and industry, and it validated what WHAM had set out to prove. Women's health is everyone's health, and investing in women's health research drives innovation, fuels stronger economies, and improves outcomes across society. To realize the full potential of this moment, we need strategic alignment across science, capital, and commercialization. And that is why WHAM established a comprehensive pipeline of collaboratives designed to address every point along the innovation continuum. We began with the WHAM Research Collaborative that now represents over 100 leading researchers and clinicians from top institutions united in accelerating sex-based research across major disease areas. The WHAM Investment Collaborative brings together some of the world's largest venture firms to direct more capital into women's health companies. And the WHAM Innovator Circle represents 30 early-stage venture firms ranging from $5 million to $150 million in size, each deeply committed to women's health. The WHAM Life Sciences Collaborative, a consortium of leaders from pharma and biotech dedicated to embedding sex-based biology throughout the product development life cycle, together with these collaboratives form a cohesive, high-performing ecosystem, one that generates frontline insights, advances scientific discovery, and fuels the data that underpins our work. At the same time, we're navigating a research landscape where a wave of NIH grant cancellations has put life-saving science at risk. Because women's health research is already dramatically underfunded, These cuts threaten early stage innovation in profound ways. And to support innovation moving forward, WHAM launched the 2025 WHAM Edge Awards, $25,000 grants supporting early stage investigators pursuing groundbreaking sex-based research. I'm excited to announce that we received a record number of applications which were reviewed by our Scientific Advisory Board, who will share more details as part of our program. And we thank them for their tireless contributions in selecting these awardees. We are thrilled that we raised, we thought, $250,000 to fund 10 extraordinary projects, but last night we actually received a $50,000 grant for 2 more, which is exceptional, and I thank the donor incredibly and all the donors for their generous donations and contributions to women's health, and especially to all of those of you who have made a contribution. You'll learn more about these diverse awards later in the program. Today's program will offer a clear briefing on the state of women's health research and insights into funding models and data strategies that can move the needle, conversations with leaders across research, business, and philanthropy, and an update and celebration of this year's WHAM Edge Award winners. This convening is more than a presentation of great ideas and leaders. It's intended to be a catalyst. It's designed to ignite ideas, to forge collaborations, and to accelerate the stronger future for women's health, to which we are all committed. I encourage you to join the conversation using the Q&A function, sending us your suggestions and your questions and ideas for how we can create a new paradigm. Together, we're going to push this work forward and ensure that women's health research advances with the speed, rigor, and investment it deserves. To begin with, let's now hear from a few of our experts.
Women make up more than 50% of our population, and yet less than 10% of the NIH budget is dedicated to women's health.
When we design medicine for only half of the population, we fail everyone. But when we design it for everyone, we can transform the future of health.
Since 1995, over 50,000 articles have been published on the human brain, shedding light on the most complex organ in the human body. But of those 50,000 articles, less than half of 1% focus on health factors specific to women.
What our scientists are uncovering right now are things that medicine never knew before. How the immune cells of women are stronger, more active, more abundant. How we can use that power to prevent and treat cancer, to ward off different kinds of infections, and keep women stronger and healthier in every generation.
We can't afford to lose momentum. It is essential that we continue to fund, protect, and expand women's health research, because investing in the science means saving lives for the better.
Women give birth to 100% of our future. Any impact we have on them and their health and well-being will have a significant downstream impact on future generations.
We need people from all walks of life to stand up for women's health research, because when we invest in women's health, the benefits ripple across families, communities, and generations.
Starting off, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kat Bohannon. Kat's work sits at the intersection of science, storytelling, and the lived experience of women, exactly where WHAM is focused. Through her best-selling book titled Eve, Kat reframes 200 million years of evolution through the female body, challenging long-held assumptions and revealing how much of our understanding of health has been shaped without women at the center. Kat is here today because of her research that gives us something essential: context. She helps us see how the gaps we're working to close didn't emerge overnight. They're rooted in history and in the ways science has traditionally been done. And she offers a powerful lens for imagining what becomes possible when women are finally measured, studied, and valued in the data. We're thrilled to welcome Kat to set the stage for a forum dedicated to rewriting that future.
Thank you so much, Carolee, and thank you to WHAM for inviting me here in our virtual room. It's as if we're in a room, but we're not, but we are. This is fine. We're used to it since the pandemic. And of course, what it is really is an excuse to gather. because that's what the point of WHAM is. We are gathering together to put good ideas in a room to have better collaborations, better conversations, and of course, encourage funding to go to the right places. So I'm very excited about. As Carolee mentioned, I'm Kat Bohannon. I wrote the book Eve, How the Female Body Drove 200 Million Years of Human Evolution. Obviously a wildly unambitious topic. I also am now contracted with Knopf for my second book, and I'm busy writing it. It's called Being Alive, How the New Science of Women's Health Could Save Us All. Equally unambitious, as you can tell. However, it feels a little bit more manageable because now I'm dealing with a single human lifespan, which is about 80 or so years, hopefully more in the future, as opposed to 200 million. So this is like bite-sized. This is fine. This is totally manageable. Now, the reason I got into this space is probably the same reason a lot of you did. I came to learn somewhere in my adulthood that the medicine I was receiving may or may not actually be particularly tailored to my body. I learned that as a person with ovaries, wow, a lot of science and medicine really didn't know what the heck that did, so let's pretend it's nothing. But today is not simply about pity, it's about promise. Today is about where we're going, not simply where we've been. And of course, there is a danger of preaching to the choir. Let's think about the room we're in right now, okay? There are a lot of founders and funders here. There are a lot of clinicians and researchers and concerned patients. There are a lot of advocates of every stripe, but probably if you're here, you already care about women. If you're here in this virtual room, you already have heard some of the things that Carolee so intelligently laid out for you, which is the moral case of how to do research on female bodies and why we should, right? But I'm going to give you a little bit of a story of how I came to the topic, because I think it's still worth doing at least a little bit of preaching to the choir. Here's why. My mother was the director of a church choir. I'm an atheist, but she was, okay, when I grew up. And I can tell you that preaching to the choir does quite a lot of important work, because it is hard to keep singing in an exhausting world, okay? It is hard to keep playing that instrument, hard to keep sounding the bell, pick your music metaphor, okay? When funding is being cut left and right, when somehow the government got more misogynist, when, well, I don't know, I'm gonna wave the hand at the burning room, right? It is hard. So it is useful to gather because it gives us strength to go out into the even more exhausting rooms where we have to make the case for funding to less amenable listeners, right? Okay, so here's how I got into the topic. 2012. I am a PhD student at Columbia University in the beautiful bubble that is the Ivy. Well, there are problems, but you know, talk about Columbia now, hey, right? And there I am, and I go to see a sci-fi movie, because I'm a fan of sci-fi, not just for funsies, but also because sci-fi is part of how we work out what our current anxieties are. Sci-fi is made of what we're worried about now and what we have hope for now. So I went to see the film Prometheus, which is the prequel to Alien. You remember when prequels were a thing? And I go in and there's this great scene. Dr. Elizabeth Shaw, who's the protagonist of the film, has now been impregnated with a vicious alien squid, as you do. And she goes to what we all know is the future of medicine, which is a med pod, a kind of sexy coffin that can make your latte and cure your space cancer. We all know that med pods are going to be great. Okay. She wants what any reasonable person would want when impregnated with a vicious alien squid. She would like it out of her. She would like a C-section. She would like a DNC. She would like this to be done so that she can shamble off to more adventures. Very reasonable desire. So she goes to the med pod and she enters in her voice and she says, I would like a C-section. I think she says something like cesarean, but fine, okay. And the med pod says, beep boop, I'm sorry, this med pod is calibrated for male patients only. And what happens in the following scene, she gives herself a C-section. Let's call it a moment of self-care with lasers, and staples herself together and then shambles off to more adventures. And the reason this is interesting, besides it's just a great moment of film, is that it actually perfectly encapsulates what a lot of women feel when they enter the clinic. They're like, oh God, what's about to happen to me? Is this going to work on me at all? Are any of these treatments tailored to my particular needs? Will I even be heard in this moment? And so back in 2012, I saw this and I heard a woman in the row behind me say, crap, who does that? Yes, who sends a multi-trillion-dollar expedition into space and forgets to make sure that the equipment works on women, right? How is that even plausible? How is this not shot down in the script room when it was being workshopped? Well, I happen to know as a grad student at Columbia that that's us. That was us for a very, very long time, wasn't it? In fact, you and I and anyone else with ovaries in this virtual room is already kind of Dr. Elizabeth Shaw, because for a very long time in the biomedical sciences, there was the male norm. We talk about bench to bedside. Let's talk about the bench for a minute, okay? We were not studying males, not the rat, not the guinea pig, and for a very long time, not even human beings. We simply weren't studying females because we thought that is how we controlled for estrus. Now, don't worry, I'm going to get to the good news, but let's spend a little minute here because we have to think about consequences of assuming that being sexed doesn't matter. Okay, in nearly every tissue in your body, there are sex hormone receptors. That has been true since we were fish, but it is especially true in mammals. Now, these are differently distributed and they have different functions. They do different things, part of which we're only coming to understand because we're finally studying the female, but they're there. And of course, if you have estrus, we call this the menstrual cycle. That means there's a cascade of hormones that go in a semi-predictable pattern up and down across your menstrual cycle, doing all kinds of things to all kinds of different tissues. So if you're a good scientist, if you want to create what we call an elegant experiment, the easiest way to simply control for that, unless you specifically want to know something about it, if you're studying breast cancer specifically, or studying the uterus, or what we sometimes call bikini medicine, is to simply, well, not study it at all, right? Simply don't have the female in the equation. And for a very, very long time, unfortunately, that was true. Now let's think about the research pipeline then. Okay, let's say in rat, you're mostly studying males. You don't want to kill your dams. They're expensive for your knockout mice. You don't want to kill the female because you have to kill it at the end of the experiment. You don't want to have to breed them. Okay, you're studying the males. It's just balls all the way down. That's what you're doing. Okay, fine. Now you're finally entering the research pipeline for women's health. Maybe you have something that could be a target for application. You have something that could eventually become a treatment target. Okay, now maybe slowly you're starting to build up your argument for a clinical trial. You have not half of model, you have less than half, right? Because if you don't really understand what sex hormones are doing to the male, because of course all of the species has all of the sex hormones, then you're not really understanding what it's doing over there either. Okay, now you're in the research pipeline with less than half of an applicable model. Now let's say you enter into clinical trials. Well, until the 1990s, females of reproductive age, by this I mean women and girls, were not allowed to be in clinical trials unless you had a really good argument because of thalidomide. Some of you are old enough to remember thalidomide, yes? Okay, we didn't want to screw up babies. So there were very important rules for a very long time to not screw up the babies. So maybe don't include females in your clinical trials. So maybe this is a problem. So what you end up having in terms of consequences are a wide range of treatments, pharmaceutical and otherwise, that had never been studied on female bodies properly at all. Not in rat, not in literal guinea pig, and maybe not even in human. Now, in the 1990s, we thought maybe that was a bad idea, actually, and so we changed some rules at the FDA and at the NIH, and we said, oh, actually, maybe we should have some chicks. Maybe actually reproductive age is like 11 or so into 50-something. That's most of our lives. So, okay, so maybe with the females, yes. Unfortunately, there are still loopholes big enough to drive whole truckloads through. We're working on closing those loopholes, but it was good news. My book would not exist if it were not all of the thousands of labs around the world running to catch up to fill this knowledge gap. Likewise, the NIH changed its rules more in the 20-aughts, and in order to say, okay, the rats, though, maybe some she-rats, maybe that would be a good idea, and properly studying for sex differences, maybe actually because half the female population, half of the, okay, fine. And so again, a huge wave of wonderful research into the biology of sex differences. We are in this moment riding that wave, okay? But we're playing catch up is the problem, right? So here's the thing about medical guidance. Medical guidance is a bit like the Catholic Church. Here we are in church again. The Catholic Church only forgave Galileo in the 90s. About when actually the NIH and FDA changed their rules. So, okay, and they didn't let him off because we now know that we circle around the sun. They let him off because of a technicality. Look it up. It's in the Vatican record, okay? So medical guidance is slow because you need a preponderance of evidence, right? You need a huge basis of research in order to change your basic guidance because you want to do right by patients. Things change quickly in research space and you want to make sure that the evidence is solid, or solid gold science, yeah? But if there is a gap, if there's a lack of research to form that foundation, that means inevitably guidance on changing what we should do with female bodies is running more slowly, is hamstrung. We need to speed it up, which is exactly what WHAM is doing, which is very, very good news. Now we know, for example, that if you take one of the most common medications for sleep disorders, which is Ambien, that female patients need about half the average dose to male. Now, how we learned that? We learned it mostly through car crash data, okay? So female patients who had taken the drug were more likely to get into a car crash the next morning because the slope at which the medication left the body was a little bit different. The side effects were a little bit different. We learned this through retrospective data. We can do better. We are doing better. But again, only 15 minutes. The case is well made. The choir is well preached to. So let me give you a little bit of a tour of some of the things that come out of thinking about the evolutionary context for these things. Okay. Now, Carol Lee already talked about, and you'll hear from some more folk today, about the deep differences in the female immune system. Now, why might that be in our evolutionary context? Well, you see, ladies and gentlemen, we stopped laying eggs. For most of the time in our history on Earth, we laid eggs outside of our bodies. This was a very good idea. I still would have preferred to lay a clutch of eggs than give birth the way that I did. I imagine if you did, you would too. It's a much more sensible path. Now, the reason it has impact on the immune system, however, once you have turned your uterus into a Burrow/H.R. Geiger fever dream of a meat factory, once, in other words, you gestate, that means that your body is keeping alive both you and a very hungry partial allograft. It means that now your body has to have a deeply dynamic immune system that can handle the rigors of something like a human pregnancy. You need to not attack the baby or else the species goes extinct, but you also not need to die of every last infection while pregnant, because that also doesn't do so well for our reproductive path. Okay, so given the objectively very bad idea of having evolved to be mammals that give birth to live beings, now you have a female reproductive tract that needs to be dynamically influential in the body-wide immune system. And you need to have a placenta where the baby docks on, if you're not in the med space, that likewise controls some of these signals. What does that do? Well, it means throughout the entire lifespan of the female, you have an incredibly dynamic, responsive immune system that arguably a lot of the time runs a little bit hot. We now know from Dr. Sabra Klein's work in vaccines that the average female patient needs about half the dose of a flu vaccine to achieve the same antibody result, the same response. Simply being female. We're still figuring out what the hell the mechanisms are driving that, but we know that that is true. We also likewise have learned that during pregnancy, our response to infections and also to certain vaccines, again, runs a bit of a different profile than when we're not in that reproductive state, right? So what do you do with that? Well, you can say there are good evolutionary arguments for it. You can also say, oh, the male then might be less protected in a number of different vaccinated scenarios. So what can we do to boost a male response? Well, that's a hot area of research right now. We're starting to look into what we can do to boost both a female pregnant person's immune response to a vaccine to pass on maternal immunity to her offspring, as well as maybe help the guys out because they tend to die a lot more during flu season. We don't like that. We want to save their lives a whole lot, right? Which is to say, simply having that evolutionary context, simply knowing that there are good reasons why an immune system might be different, helps us open the door to move past that assumption that it's not. And that is moving past simply bikini medicine, right? That is moving past the assumption that the female is simply boobs and a set of pregnancy tubes, right? That actually the entire body is pregnant when a person is pregnant, right? And the entire immune system across that female lifespan is then thereby responsive. Now, there's one more site that I'm going to give you just for fun in an evolutionary context, and then we're going to move forward because I can't wait to hear from all of our speakers today. Another site where the evolution of our bodies has greatly influenced that immunological profile is actually breastfeeding. Believe it or not. Here's a fun thing. It turns out that breastfeeding is a site of deep immune exchange. So you've probably heard about a maternal immune transfer, wherein the mother, if she gets a vaccine, can pass some of that immunity on to her baby. We love that for her. We love that for us. The naive immune system, when it's born, vulnerable. Okay. But it doesn't stop there, because we keep passing both immunological agents and whole live cells through the nipple to the baby when that baby breastfeeds. We're now learning. This is amazing work. Okay, I'm going to teach you the physics of it real fast. Okay, so let's say this is a breast. All right, well, yeah, here. Okay, if you are a newborn and you are properly latching, you're flanging your lips around that nipple like lamprey-like, and you are sucking in as much of that milk as you can. Okay, fine. Actually, it's triggering a letdown reflex. There are slides. Moving on. All right. What you're actually doing, though, because you're able to seal around the nipple, is you're creating a potential for a vacuum, which is a major evolutionary upgrade. We used to just lick the milk off a furry belly. Now we have nipples. Okay. When you form a vacuum in the enclosed space of the mouth, what you do is you create a tide. You suck in your cheeks, shrink that space, and then the milk comes in a wave over the top. But because you're moving that tongue in the enclosed space, you're rolling, suck, suck, swallow, suck, suck, swallow. Milk is coming in. It's a lot like what you've seen on the shore, okay? If you don't know fluidics and wave function. You have milk coming in a wave over the top into that infant's mouth. But with every tide, there's an undertow. So what happens is then the baby's saliva and shed oral cells are being sucked back up into the nipple, into the maternal breast, where it then distributes throughout the ductwork into her breast tissue, which dynamically responds by reading it like some kind of ancient code with an army of sensors and immunoagents. We don't entirely know how it works. What we do know is that if the kid is sick, the milk changes. The immunological profile of that milk changes, and it even is responsive depending on the type of infection. This is true in rat. This seems to be true in human. What you have, in other words, in milk, of all things, is a co-produced biological product, which is a primary site of immune exchange. And studying how that works is starting to give us insight into neonatal health in general, why the neonate's immune system seems to work a bit differently, how even in that mini puberty of early infancy, there are sex differences in immunological response, and how we might hijack some of those mechanisms to create better treatments in the NICU. Which is to say, simply paying attention to female bodies and understanding that they came from somewhere, including egg layers, is part of how we're going to create better medicine for everyone. Because the thing to remember is that you can care about female health even if you're not female. Males get more infections across their lifespans from birth forward right? This is true in global data, and it's not just about diagnosis. Understanding female resilience and female immunological dynamism is going to save a lot of male lives. Paradoxically, probably theirs first, because when you have a better bedrock of an understanding of a system, which we have of male bodies in general, as soon as you add on an additional layer of mechanism, well, those are the ones who first benefit. But whatever, floats all boats, people. We're going to save a lot of lives here. So I'm really looking forward to today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kat. First of all, I'm so thrilled that you like sci-fi movies. Otherwise, I'm not sure where we'd be. And I really could have listened to you for a very long time. Your comments were sharp, innovative, and really give us the context that we're looking for. And I can't wait for the next book to be released, so you'll have to let us know when that is. Next, I'm so pleased to introduce Janet Foudy, who is a very brilliant leader who's been a valued senior advisor to WHAM over the past year. Janet just brings a strategist lens to women's health, and it's shaped, as you know, by decades of leading large-scale transformation and by her deep commitment to helping women rise and thrive in every sector. She's been a dynamic partner collaborating with us to drive the business opportunity of investing in women's health and in mobilizing leaders across industries to act. And today we're delighted because Janet's moderating a conversation that gets to the heart of why we are all here, which Kat so brilliantly outlined for us. It's understanding the magnitude of the missed opportunity in women's health and what it will take to truly change it. So welcome, Janet, and thanks to you and wonderful panelists for all the tremendous contributions that everyone on this panel has made to WHAM. So I'm so eager, as we all are, to hear this fantastic discussion. Over to you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Carolee and Kat. I have read your book. I have not heard your personal voiceover, which was entertaining, informative, and very thought-provoking. So we're going to have a wonderful conversation for the next half an hour or so with three incredible leaders who will get introduced in just a moment. If I was going to summarize what Kat and Carolee just shared around where research has been, couple of things. The gap is systemic and decades, if not longer, long. The consequences are really measurable and costly, but the upside is enormous, both economically and societally. Where we're going to pivot the conversation to today is that we're at a true inflection point with clearly evolving both government and philanthropic commitments, a very active landscape, AI-enabled discovery, advances in genomics and diagnostics, and unprecedented cross-sector alignment, which you're going to see some good examples of throughout our conversations today. Given all that, we have both challenges and opportunities, the likes with which we have not seen before. So you're in for a real treat as you're going to hear from three incredible leaders with incredibly rich scientific and medical backgrounds, but are thinking deeply about how to advance the conversation. So I'm going to have them each introduce themselves and share a few opening thoughts. So Hadeen, we're going to start with you. I'd love to hear, after you introduce yourself briefly, what you see as the most critical gaps in women's health research today, and how is your organization and the researchers around you trying to address them?
Thank you. Good to see you all, and what an incredible program so far. So I'm Dr. Hadeen Jaffe. I'm a professor of psychiatry in the field of women's health at Harvard Medical School. Currently, I'm at Brigham and Women's Hospital, where I oversee all of women's health research under a center called the Connors Center for Women's Health. And I am starting a new position in December at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center as department chair for psychiatry. I've been at Harvard Medical School since 1994. And I've been working in the field of women's health, women's brain health research since then. And most of my research relates to women's brain health in the context of menopause and in the context of breast cancer. Both of these situations are situations in which the natural health trajectory or the treatments we use for breast cancer affect estrogen and brain levels of female hormones, estrogens, progesterones. And so my research has been focused on how these hormone changes across these different clinical scenarios affect mood, sleep, temperature, fatigue, cognition. And I do this in very experimentally intense research studies and clinical trials. I also am a clinician in that space, so I see patients with these different situations with brain issues related to female hormones in the brain. So I will say all of the work that I have done has come from my patients asking me questions. Why did this happen to me? Why do they not know how to treat it? How should we treat it? And my going and asking people, what do we know about it? And a lot of people saying we're not so sure. So what are the things that we are doing in this space, and how is our institution trying to improve on this? I will say that firstly, one of our main goals is to help ensure that every area of medicine has us raise a question, what about women? Is it different? Is it the same? I consider it like foundational, that it should be foundational in the way we approach the work we do. And this has been the case in some fields more than others, heart health more than others. We don't think about it with kidney disease, but there are some differences. And of course, in brain health, we do think about it. We tend to think about these things, what happens in pregnancy, what happens in these other hormonal transitions. We don't think about it just at a population level. What's the course of the illness over the time period? Women have certain diseases onset later, because they're protected by estrogens up until midlife. So I want to let others share their thoughts, but I will just say that the main thing we're trying to do is ensure that every part of medicine, researchers, clinicians, we all stop and think, what about it? Because unless you stop and think, you don't take that path to explore it. So that's my sort of, hopefully, turning it back to you, Janet, and all the other speakers on the panel.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Hadeen. I'm personally grateful for your work as a breast cancer survivor, and recently been through menopause, which are two things I never would have said out loud for most of my career. I'm grateful for your work. I'm also just going to note that this is not my living room that I'm sitting in. I'm actually at the New York Academy of Medicine today, where there is a women's leadership conference. And I apologize for the interruptions. There's supposed to be a sign outside asking people not to walk in, but clearly that is not strictly held. So hopefully that was the last interruption on my end. So bear with your patience as we're all doing this work from the spots that we're in. Jill, I'd like to jump to you for a quick introduction, and maybe you can pull on the thread that Hadeen shared about heart health. I'd love to hear both your perspective on that and talk about how stronger evidence in research really shapes the way you and your colleagues deliver care.
Yeah, thank you. And it's always an honor and a pleasure to be here amongst friends and colleagues. So thank you. I'm Jill Kalman. I am also partnering with Stacey Rosen on this panel, who's now here with us today as the Senior Vice President for the Katz Women's Institute, and also the presently of the American Heart Association. And I'm the Chief Medical Officer for the Northwell Health System, and I'm a cardiologist. I'm a heart failure cardiologist, but I have been in women's health my entire career. And I have to say, at a health system level and a healthcare delivery level, what our intent is, as there is stronger evidence in women's health research, everything that Hadeen spoke about, we want to implement into action, so that when we learn new evidence that works in women, and it's been hard to get at, and I'll get to the cardiac connection, we will implement that at a system level so that every patient and every woman can benefit by outcomes. And we do have an institute model. And it's very similar, Hadeen, to what you were talking about, is that we look at women's health across the continuum from every stage of life, what that woman is at risk for. It's not a narrow definition, it's a broad definition. And then we have experts and subject matter experts in those fields that can inform us all. So the stronger the evidence, the more personalized the care. I think Eve and Kat mentioned this earlier, that since 1993, the NIH mandated women to be included in clinical trials, and I was actually a cardiology fellow at the time, but that never happened. So even the strongest evidence in cardiovascular medicine with statins improving outcomes, we use the guidelines adopted from the trials, which have been a greater percentage men, and that's how we treat women. So when we acquire this evidence, we then can deliver personalized care. And then when we anticipate at a much more sophisticated way what women will develop and how to treat that more specifically, and therefore you save lives. It'll also change the way we deliver care by having more evidence. It also drives innovation. So we know the evidence, we know the personalized information, we'll then be able to develop therapies to having that information. So we need the research. It certainly is evolving. We need more of it. And I love the way Hadeen framed it was when you ask the question, the women will tell you what they need to know. And the research needs to be conducted, supported, commercialized, everything that WHAM is about here. So thank you.
So Jill, perfect tee up for Alice, the last of our panelists, to introduce herself. And just, you could probably tell by her title and her background, she has a very diverse background, which I love that she brings to this conversation, which is both as a researcher and now as an investor, very accomplished in both ends. I'd love to hear sort of how you pull the thread through from Hadeen and Jill on how high quality research drives early stage investment opportunities in and around women's health.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and wonderful to be among this group. I also noticed that WHAM has a similar color scheme, so very similar and lovely as well. So by way of introduction, my name is Alice. I'm a clinician turned consultant at McKinsey, turned VC investor. Our fund is called Foreground Capital. We invest exclusively in women's health, and that means areas that affect women, only affect women, versus differently affect women, versus disproportionately affect women. And we are spun out of RH Capital, which some of you may have heard of in other ways, and still managing that portfolio. And our investments, I would say, are mostly early stage, so C to Series A, so not the first check-in, but probably one of the earlier rounds. And our mandate also spans both healthcare delivery and services, as well as the life sciences. So I will answer your question with the second part of our investment strategy, which is around really new science. Yeah, and I always say, early basic science research, non-dilutive funding, that's actually really, really critical, because as VC investors, we sit in a very specific part of the capital spectrum. We're not funding the basic science research or even translational research. We're also not funding companies to get off the ground and started. We really come in a little bit later. So it's really critical for others to have stepped in, to have help researchers find new targets and develop new therapeutics, new diagnostics, new medical devices. That's all happening before, we arrive at the scene. By the time we get there, the science has to be solid already. Not developed to the end, but have some substantive rationale, maybe have some kind of early proof of concept. They're not in humans. And a company has to have been formed, with a team, ideally a full-time team. And then there's often even a friends and family round before, institutional venture investors get into the mix. So we're very appreciative of groups that are funding that research. And it is a challenging time where a lot of federal funding has, scaled back. And the great news is that in the past year, 2 years, we've seen a lot of new players emerge on the non-dilutive side. Groups like the Nuttall Family Foundation, Pivotal Ventures have made some commitments. Gates has talked about commitments. So it's really critical to see those groups step up during this time.
Thank you so much, Alice. Hadeen, we're going to come back to you to actually take sort of Alice's closing comments in and around how do we bring things to life translationally. Talk about strengthening the research pipeline for us so that we know that discoveries in women's health are designed for real world translation, and then the work that Alice does to get them from there to the next step. So talk to us about how you're thinking about that.
Yeah, sure. So one thing that Alice said right at the end that I want to continue on, which is that there's really fantastic, exciting investment from foundations and larger organizations, which we need. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And I also want to say we need the smaller funds as well. And this is a real, shout out and message of gratitude to WHAM for funding these Edge Awards, because each of these people who is funded, these are not millions and hundreds of millions of dollars of funding. These are smaller investments, but they're critical because these are the people who are saying, I want to go in this direction. But there aren't resources for most of them to get started in this direction. There's money in other fields, oncology, heart disease, unrelated to women, and of course, every area. But when you start to drill down and say, what about the sex differences or female specific, those smaller investments really make a big difference to get people started, who then go on to apply for bigger grants, who then go on to form companies. So just, tremendous gratitude, because it makes such a difference. Speaking on behalf of all the people who I know received it, and somebody who, 30 years ago myself got these awards, and I don't think I would have gone in. I wouldn't have the staying power to go into this field, because that's how you pay your salary and pay your technician salary. So thank you. And I think it's related to this question of pipeline, right? Because when people work at an academic medical center like myself, or at a hospital, the vast majority of us, we can't do research unless we have the funding for it. If you're lucky enough to be in an institution that has a lot of money, and there aren't that many on the list, even the ones you think have a lot of money, there isn't a lot of give in the system. And so, Pete, you're told, work in the emergency room, or work on somebody else's research project, or go see, work in this clinical setting. And of course, we want to do that. We went to medical school because we're interested in doing that. And the PhD, non-clinical PhDs amongst us do want to pursue research, but they have to work on somebody else's project unless they have some resource themselves that gets them directed in towards looking at a question of female-specific disorders that have been underfunded, that have not had the investigation that we need. And, Alice sort of mentioned that, her fund invests specifically in female-specific disorders. We still don't know a lot about, the quote-unquote bikini medicine. We still don't know a lot about it. And we also need to know about areas that affect the health of women across other parts of the biology. So the pipeline needs to be stoked at every stage, and you can't rest with this. You can't take it for granted that we've done our due diligence, we've done our job, it's going to continue, because institutions are squeezed, priorities change. Really, we are really fortunate when there are major priorities like Northwell under Jill and Stacy, and myself, very fortunate at Harvard, and there are other institutions represented here, where people say this matters. But part of why people say it matters, because we're fighting every day. We're fighting every day to say, I'm going to tell you why this matters. Let me tell you what I found. Let me tell you what my patient said helped her as she went through this health problem. So we can't let up with that. And once again, it's a place where you have to really make an impact on all stages of the healthcare delivery system, all stages of innovation, and each of us plays our part. We can't, each organization can't do it all, but we do. The more we work together, and the more we recognize that no ideas won't come forward to Alice's company for investment unless those of us who are doing working on the ground in the research, who are putting these therapeutics together, putting these diagnostics together, doing the initial investigation. So I never want us to take for granted that just because there are people who are excited and ambitious, that there's staying power in the system unless the system supports them nationally, internationally, locally, and across all organizations. So, just gratitude for all the people who are here who say this matters, because we can't do it without you. We really can't do it without you.
That would be a perfect cat choir moment, I think, Hadeen. Because if you're here, you're in the conversation. Okay, Jill, I want to zoom way out to the system-wide level.
Yeah.
We are in a super complex healthcare system, certainly within the United States as well as around the globe. if you could wave a magic wand and change something within the healthcare system to ensure that the research findings are implemented quickly and equitably, what might that look like? Where are we in that process of thinking about how to get this great work into clinicians' hands to help patients?
That's a tough one, right? Healthcare is.
I know.
Listen, healthcare it's meaty because
complex
healthcare
question.
It's fragmented at its best, right? And then we often have these silos. But if you have central strategy in a health system, to Hadine's point, elevates the importance of whatever that issue is, but certainly women's health or health in our communities. And by making it a priority to integrate this, it has to start with that. It can't just be we're implementing any innovation possible. It has to be innovation that changes healthcare delivery. I also think that we also need very broad data sets that look at all of women across different communities, across different ethnicities, that then can tell us what these outcomes are, and then that can be studied further. To say how we do it in health systems, it's all about communications. It's about having the experts who say this is all connected. So when there's a finding in cardiovascular disease, Stacey's role at the national level brings it to the health system level, brings it to the practitioner level, but it's our role to get their information and probably tie it together with electronic data and everything else that connects us all. I also have to say it starts with the education part. So that if we're not educating at an early phase of why biology matters, why gender matters, why differences matters, why we haven't studied women's health, we can't make an impact and just start to educate later. It really has to be at all points. I also think it is a journey to go through this and the length of time that it takes. But for true implementation abroad, it needs central vision, it needs implementation strategies, it needs partnerships across everybody here to get at the practitioner level, and also to say that our standards are, at a health system, implementing the best care possible that we know. And that's the expectation. So I think it comes from central strategy, implementing at very micro levels, and communicating at every part possible. And those are great challenges that's helped by data, connectivity, getting into every community, and the collaboration certainly that you see here.
I love that breadth of perspective. The only thing I think I would tag on that I think is a conversation that we need to be having, which is not a conversation today, is how we think about payment and reimbursement as well.
That is such a huge part, and that could be an entire panel discussion, if not an entire conference discussion, because that's and then you could add on the pharmaceutical piece or the cost of devices or the cost of innovation, because that all plays a role in how and to whom we can implement the science that we discover, and not at great cost.
So we will not unpack that fully today. We'll save that for the next conversation.
There we go.
Alice, I want to come back to you. You certainly talked about some of the trends in funding research. I'd like to switch gears and talk about trends in seeing venture capital funding and how you're seeing that evolve, and how we can think about how risk plays into that conversation as we go from the early stage research that Hadine is talking about into your world.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So, first, just to comment on the state of venture capital. Venture capital is in a challenging time. When I started, 4 or 5 years ago, it was a different era. It was literally extraordinary. Interest rates were really low. Venture funds were becoming really big. Therefore, startups were getting a lot of funding, and it was very much a founder's market. And we are in the opposite now, where venture funding, unless you're in AI, is really at an all-time low, and all parts of healthcare are feeling affected. So for the women's health startups out there that are having a hard time raising, you're not alone. A lot of that has to do with the macro environment. The good news is that women's health started with a small base, and so it has really held steady somewhat in this challenging environment. We haven't seen a decline per se in women's health funding. It really kind of held steady, while overall healthcare peaked and then has had a bit of a decline. And SVB actually has some really great data here that folks are interested in can look at. So that's just the backdrop that we're in. But enough doom and gloom. A lot of things do give me hope within VC and women's health, and that's a few ways. Number one is there are more and more dedicated funds like ourselves that focus exclusively in women's health, and then also funds that are not exclusive but have women's health as one out of 3 or 4 pillars. That's a flourishing, growing landscape. Most of us invest at the early stage, so that's great to see that landscape grow. And also, very importantly, there are more and more large, multi-stage generalist players also getting into the space. Not all of them have made investments quite yet, but they're looking very keenly and also waiting for the pipeline to mature, because some of these funds only invest once you hit 10 million in revenue or once there's FDA approval. There's a later stage player, and it's really important to have the bigger checks in the mix as well, because early stage can only carry companies to a certain point, and then companies then need funding from these later players, so you then get to exit. So I am feeling a lot more momentum and energy around that, despite the challenging VC environment, the challenging political environment, lots of challenges, but also a lot of bright spots. The other is, women's health is really on the main stage agenda in really big ways. I've been going to health for several years now, and this year there were several panels. There's a whole dedicated pitch competition, and all these kind of generalist, more mainstream events are talking about women's health. So that's really great. And the other part of your question is, how do we get, venture to take more risk and invest in women's health startups? Well, to understand VC decision making, it's really about return potential. I put $1 in today. Can that become $3, $5, $10, in some number of years from now, and hopefully not too long? Let's say 5 to 7 years, up to 10 years. And so that's really the decision making there. And so for funds, it's not just about the strength of the business, the science, the market opportunity, really, what does that pathway to returns look like? And women's health is an area that doesn't have as many huge exits as some other spaces. And a lot of that's because it is a younger industry. So it takes time to mature to that. So we don't have time. We haven't had the time to grow into that. And it's been a challenging exit environment. In the past 3 or 4 years, there really hasn't been a lot of exits for anybody. And I like to think that, for VCs, the way to really have an edge is to invest in overlooked areas. If everyone's flocking to it, it's probably too late. It's going to drive up the valuations. There won't be good returns. And women's health is really, it's really the gem to be uncovered in this time. And so what I would say is to have investors really focus on the fundamentals of how big is the market, how much is there unmet need, reimbursement. Someone mentioned that both in the Q&A over text and also live. Like those are all really important things to look at, because we aren't a space that has tons of exits and tons of repeat founders.
Yeah, Carolee's work, the very original WHAM report, I think certainly highlighted the opportunity, starting with research and then to venture, and this idea of overlooked. I have this double-edged reaction, Alice. I both cringe because I think, how could this be overlooked? But delighted that certainly creates a space for the opportunity. Hey, Dean, I'd like you to address directly, you hinted at this a little bit, but I'd like you to address just head on, in the spirit of transparency, how you are thinking about this moment when federal funding is constrained, and what strategies we can be thinking about to sustain critical studies and accelerate the great progress we've been talking about in this conversation today.
Sure. So, it is true that we have made a lot of progress recently, and we feel the sort of, we had the wind behind our back, and now we feel like we're heading into the wind more. And so it's a lot to manage. And at the same time, we have grown the field, and we do have more people talking about it. And we do have more people saying, I never thought I would do this, but I stumbled into it because I had a collaborator who asked me about this, because there was a grant I saw because a postdoc asked the question. So we have more people who now have taken on the mantle of doing sex differences research or female specific research, who didn't anticipate going into it. And I have personally funded some of them in my center, young people who, they said they never thought they'd look at lung disease, in women. And all of a sudden somebody came to them. I said, well, look, do a collaboration. And now their whole portfolio is that. So we have more people. We do have energy in the field. In general, research is more constrained now everywhere, because the amount of dollars coming from the major funder and the NIH and other federal agencies has gone down meaningfully. So, Alice mentioned, there's the macro level, and we in women's health research are affected by that, as everybody is. To what extent are we more affected by it? Certainly, there are parts of women's health that have been much more affected than general fields. And it might not, pregnancy research, some of it was looking at different populations and different races that was affected. Long COVID, some COVID and, research which affects women more. You don't think of them as being, female specific. Of course, some gender related transgender health care and investigation has been restricted. So we have been more affected in some ways, but the general constraint is there, and the general constriction is there. So what has, how do we navigate this? So one thing is we are grateful when foundations, small, medium, and large, come out and say, we'd like to invest in the work. We see this as a priority. We see this as an area of growth because we are all rushing to apply. And, Alice mentioned some of the organizations, but also, Welcome Leap, they've come out with these women's health areas. ARPA-H previously did too. So there's scaffolding on which we are growing while we're waiting, hopefully, that federal funding will expand. I think the other thing we're doing is we are all trying to find ways to support the junior people who are working with us to keep them going in the short term. We call it, whether it's bridge funding or emergency funding or some kind of strategy to support them so that they can keep going during this really challenging time and then be ready to blossom in their own resources in the future. So for anybody who's listening, who has resources, ask some of the junior people, is there anything I can do? And of course, we senior people also need help too, but, we're trying to look out for the next generation because, if you lose that generation, the amount of time it takes to reclaim the progress is huge. And I think we saw that happen, like the Women's Health Initiative, when the results came out, and very few people, there was no funding for us doing research related to female hormones and hormone therapy, heart disease and hormones. There was very little research going on in that space. And very little teaching about it, very little clinical expertise about it. And now we're, coming up 20 years ago, and we've lost like a whole cohort of people. And now we're trying to regain, our footing. So you need to help people keep going, even if, we can't keep everybody going with the same kind of depth and breadth that we would like.
I think that's a wonderful tee up to the rest of our day today, Hedin. So I'm going to close us on a speed round around optimism. And I'm going to start with you, Jill. What are you the most optimistic about today? And I'd like to hear from each of you about where women's health is in this moment.
I love ending with optimism because we have to drive that, and it has to come from us because we need to remain optimistic, and it's important to do it together. I'm optimistic about a lot. I will do this quickly, but I am optimistic that research is evolving and we are getting there, and we're on the main stage. Absolutely, Alice, about health and other conferences. But I love what Alice said. So to quote you, that women's health is the gem to be uncovered. But I'm going to end with, I'm optimistic about women as patients. They are saying it out loud. They are saying what they need. They are part of what we are doing to craft both the questions and demand the answers. So I'm optimistic a lot, especially in a room like this. So thank you.
Fabulous. Alice?
Yep, I'm optimistic about the new players that are getting to the space, not just the ones who've been here for the last 5 to 10 years champion women's health, but I'm seeing new, grant makers, new investors, celebrities getting in the conversation. So that gives me a lot of hope. And a big thank you as well to the team at WHAM for all the great work and having all of us here.
Hedin?
So, echoing one thing that Jill said, which is I am really optimistic that our patients, our colleagues, our friends, our community are saying, what about this? Does that apply to me? how for my sister, from, men saying for my family member as well. Is that helpful? So I actually say that I'm appreciative for the millennials, because I think the millennials are really pushing forward in that space. And I'm also really optimistic because there are more people in more influential, powerful positions, women and men, people who see this as a priority and value, who are making this an explicit, intentional goal. And it's not something that there's sort of a workaround to try and bring it to people's attention. It's really, it's on the agenda as a priority with key stakeholders.
So thank you all for both your comments today, more importantly, for your incredible leadership in advancing this conversation. I always try to summarize, and the consultant in me always wants to summarize into 3 points, and there were way too many nuggets in this very quick conversation. I will try to boil it down to 3, which is small moves matter. We need to stoke at every stage. And the theme that all of you echoed, which is listen to women, they will tell you, and they are telling you. So incredible gratitude for this group of leaders and the ability to have this conversation today. Let's turn it back to some of our experts over video to hear what they have to say to complement this great conversation.
Thank you.
Health research has been too long in coming.
This awful condition while I was pregnant. I was so relieved when I was diagnosed, and they explained to me, well, we haven't been able to study it because it only happens to women.
Women's health needs innovation and creativity. It needs everybody to look at it in a new way.
There is a difference in the biology.
There's just this massive data gap when it comes to the female body.
It's not a women's health problem, it's a problem.
The immune responses are very, very different. In response to a pathogen threat, a male immune system will launch the Army. The female immune system will launch the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines.
This past June, WHAM hosted a celebration in D.C. for the 30th anniversary of the Revitalization Act of 1993.
30 years since women and people of color were finally included in NIH clinical trials.
I think it's time we do something. An anniversary should re-energize with a purpose.
We're not 30. We don't want to have to wait 30 more years for many great things to happen.
Women's health research isn't just good science, it's a good investment.
We need to affect long-term change. We just can't invest blindly.
We signed a presidential memorandum to establish the first ever White House initiative on women's health research.
Thank you, WHAM.
It's up to us, all women, to create the changes that we set forth today so that women and society flourish.
We can do this in 3 years. Let's not wait 30.
Well, thank you, Janet. First of all, not only for the great conversation, but for the summary. And obviously, Alice, Hadeen, and Jill, all of you have become not only insightful advisors to me, but incredibly good friends. And I cherish that tremendously. I'm going to add 3 words, Janet, for you, and they're motion, commotion, and emotion that I think all of us will feel throughout this conversation that will drive us forward. So I appreciate it very much. Thank you all. I now have a very distinct pleasure of introducing Esther Krofa, a driving force in the momentum that we're seeing in women's health today. And the Milken Institute has a proven history of tackling some of the toughest challenges in health by building powerful networks that change how research is funded, translated, and scaled. That's exactly the experience they're now bringing to women's health through the newly launched Women's Health Network. Esther is the Executive Vice President of Health at the Milken Institute and the energetic leader of this new initiative. And she has spent her career mobilizing multi-sector partnerships to drive meaningful and measurable change. So Esther, I am just so excited to include you here to share how the Milken Institute's legacy, its model, and this new network can help supercharge women's health. I can't believe that it's only a couple of weeks ago that we actually launched this wonderful new initiative. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Carolee, and what an incredible program that you've had so far. I don't know that anyone could match Kat's energy. I loved all of the animation, Kat, that you shared at the beginning with your talk, and that panel that we just had was absolutely incredible. So thank you so much for inviting me to join you, and thank you for your leadership over so many years in joining us as part of our new Milken Institute initiative.
Oh, it's my honor. So the Milken Institute has really built some of the most effective research acceleration networks, especially, for example, in rare diseases, precision medicine. And I just wonder if you could share with us what lessons from those efforts are shaping the women's health networks.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe what I can do is just start a little bit by just describing this initiative and what we hope to achieve and how we're drawing upon these lessons learned from the prior initiatives. As you just talked about, just 2 weeks ago, we had the inaugural in-person meeting of the network. We actually announced it in May at our global conference in Los Angeles, which really is a conference that's focused on our broadest investment network. And that really started this momentum of having engagement and conversation with so many leaders. On the panel previously, someone talked about the generalists, those that are not involved in women's health, really activating them to see this issue as an unmet need. And so we brought together a steering committee. We started to invite members to join this network to really have an ecosystem effect, right? Bringing representation from across life sciences, from across finance, as we talked about, but from across academia and health systems, all together to say, where can we align on issues that address the broad ecosystem with regard to women's health? Where are there opportunities for collective action that we can all roll up our sleeves and work together in a unified way in order for us to achieve as quickly as possible? So we've been just so delighted that we've welcomed 111 new members. Our goal is to get to about 200 members, and that's very aligned with our past experiences, Carol Lee, with other initiatives that we have stood up, other networks and alliances that we have stood up, which is, who are the leaders that are forming an ecosystem on an issue where there is a gap? And then how do we collectively work together to just problem solve on one issue at a time? A great example of a model that we've been using to design this network is a group that we call TRAIN, our Research Acceleration Innovation Network. Celebrated our 20th year. So hopefully one day we'll be celebrating our 20th year of this Milken Institute Women's Health Network. But there's so much that needs to be done, obviously, between and we've brought together this network that we call TRAIN, really focused on organizations that really wanted to accelerate medical product development for their disease conditions. So we have rare diseases represented, we have common diseases represented, and over the last 20 years have made a significant dent across these broader sets of challenges that these organizations face. A big one is 21st Century Cures Act, where we really started to have a conversation around patient-focused drug development. How can patients be part of that regulatory ecosystem they had not before? Or kind of just, neglected or poo-pooed that their data was not at regulatory grade quality, and TRAIN really made a difference in really bringing forward that component piece of the legislation. Another key part is the development of an actual federal entity, the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, NCATS, to say that we need a new federal entity that's focused on this valley of death. Right, basic science is funded. We have a valley of death. We don't see the translation into application for what can actually help improve human health and human life. And NCATS was signed into law in 2016 following work that TRAIN. So we're continuing that momentum. Obviously, there's work that happened with our Prostate Cancer Foundation, galvanizing $1 billion in funding to transform prostate cancer. It was once a disease that if a man was diagnosed, they thought of it as a death sentence, but now we have over a dozen therapeutics that's no longer considered a death sentence. So these are the kinds of initiatives at the Institute that we are really learning from and using those lessons learned for the Women's Health Network.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think that clarifies a lot. I've always been fascinated by the work that Michael Milken did in prostate cancer, not dissimilar than from the work that Evelyn Lauder did in breast cancer. And if you look at other diseases, it does take a very strong advocate and leader, and it does take a tremendous amount of philanthropy. And it also helps to have some celebrity thrown in. And I think we're seeing, as we've heard, a bit of this emerging right now, which is for me very exciting. One of Milken's strength lies in its three pillars, in health, finance, and philanthropy, which is basically what we're describing. So that model, you've helped identify how that's going to mobilize capital and partnerships needed to drive the women's health innovation. Can you give us any examples of what that might look like?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to back to your comment around celebrity, of course, we're just so pleased to have Dr. Jill Biden chairing this initiative. And it really relates to what you're asking, the second question, because the focus at the White House then was really around mobilizing sector funding. And she mobilized over $1 billion along with the president at that time to fund women's health research initiatives from ARPA-H, also through to NIH and to DOD. We're bringing that same concept now to talk about the role of the private sector to galvanize both philanthropic investment, but also traditional investors as well. When we look across our Milken Institute network, when we convene our broadest network, it's $32 trillion in assets under management. And when we've identified this issue as a gap, the question that we have to that network is, why are you not invested in women's health? We're talking about over 51% of the patient population. It feels like it's an obvious investment opportunity, but that market case, I mean, obviously you've made that with the WHAM reports that you've issued over the years, but there needs to be more translation to that community of what are the opportunities, what's an investable market, what kinds of returns can we aim. And so the network is really focused on designing two investment funds, one as a catalytic investment, really bringing philanthropic dollars to bear. And that is really to say, yes, we see companies, emerging innovators that are developing novel solutions. I just spoke with one yesterday, which unfortunately they have innovation, they got the seed funding, but they cannot get more capital in the door to demonstrate a market rate return. And so the catalytic investment funds really focused on, can we bring philanthropic dollars to de-risk a commercial opportunity? So we're excited about filling a very specific gap there. The second is much more on bringing the traditional commercial investment dollars to play. We'll make announcements around this aligned with our global conference in May of 2026. But what we're hearing from the investors are really that, well, it feels like it's a niche topic. And what we're trying to do with our Milken Institute network is to say, no, it's not a niche topic. This is really a healthcare topic. If you're making investments in AI, if you're making investments in digital health, if you're making investments in precision health, you also need to consider women's health as the vehicle to make those investments. And by the way, those issues apply to women's health as well. So those are the conversations that we're having time, and people talk about the generational transfer of wealth that's happening, but I also think about the traditional investors that are continuing to invest in a number of different innovations that are really here. It's not just about the future, it's really here. When we think about women's health, they just say, we don't know about it. It feels like it's an area that's untested. Let us find other market opportunities. And they're making all of these decisions looking at other opportunities. And what we're saying at the Institute is this really needs to be part of your portfolio, and there will be a market rate return. But we need to de-risk those opportunities.
Fantastic. You know, it always fascinates me when anyone refers to women as a niche market, where 52% of the population, we make 85% of the spending decisions and 80% of the healthcare decisions, which hardly is a niche market. Looking at, and the work that you're doing to demystify this, I think will also, with the impact that you can make, is tremendous. There is already, though, a huge amount of momentum, and you're coming in, I feel like, at an upward crest of this momentum, both from data and both in data and in early stage ventures. Early stage ventures are right now, as Alice pointed out, struggling. Your network with catalytic philanthropy will be very, very helpful. But how else will the network help connect and amplify the efforts that we're going to need in order to really move this to the next level?
Yeah, I mean, again, that's a great question, Carolee. Even if we got all of the investments that we want to see, and we're absolutely focused on doing that in fundraising to do that, there are a number of other downstream issues and factors, and the panel before talked about them as well. We have surveyed our network members already, and I've been in dozens of conversations with a number of organizations around issues with regulatory. Can we move through the regulatory processes much more quickly? The challenges with payment and coverage, I mean, these are the I spend so much of my time and effort. We're talking about both the public dollars with Medicare, with Medicaid. We're seeing cuts coming to Medicaid. 40% of births in the US are covered through Medicaid. So if you think about an innovator that's developing a tool that's focused on maternal and child health, and 40% of that is covered through Medicaid, you're likely not going to see any add-on investment in those areas where they say, well, what is your reimbursement process and ecosystem going to look like? It's likely going to face cuts. So we need other kinds of payment and coverage for those tools and for those technologies. When we think about the commercial payers, for example, on the employer side, they're dealing with rising healthcare costs, right? You've seen the dollars of premiums from family coverages going up. And so we need to make a case that if you can cover and invest in a way that has benefit to your employee population, you can provide some overall savings as you look across your entire offerings for your employees. So we're looking across all of these downstream issues on access to care and coverage reimbursement and employer-related issues and initiatives. And that's what we're going to be doing over the next several months, launching technical working groups so that we can understand what are the pathways to coverage. Should we think about these differently? Are there legislative approaches we need to consider? How do you get on formulary? What are best practices? Can we share those best practices through the community, but also through all of those that are working in the women's health ecosystem? So if we can't have collective action in these spaces, then each organization, each entity is just working alone. And our goal is to bring everyone together. Let's problems, let's amplify them through this network. And certainly let's make sure that we also have the funding that we need. Let's de-risk where we see these commercial opportunities. And so I think the Institute is coming in at a terrific time. You know, we're a generalist organization. It's not a women's health organization. It's signaling to the ecosystem that this is a broad health consideration. I mean, every time, like you, that I hear that women's health is niche, I said, no, this is a healthcare conversation. We need to integrate women into health, and with the Institute being involved, that it's really showing to all of those traditional players, you need to be involved, you need to prioritize women's health, you need to invest in it differently. It is not something for a small group within your organization to tackle. It needs to be part of your everyday discussions. And when I'm having those dialogues with regulators or with policymakers, the time is here, but we can't take that for granted. This is not going to move without momentum, but certainly without collective action. And that's really what we hope to see.
Well, first of all, we're all incredibly appreciative of the work that you and everyone at the Milken Institute is bringing to this. You have the capacity, the breadth, and the depth of experience and knowledge, and I believe the ability to really create significant change, and especially your experience in regulatory payer, all these issues that you're describing, which will bring to it a context that I think up until now hasn't all necessarily been brought together in the same way. So first of all, I am incredibly honored and grateful to be a senior advisor to this initiative. And I know that this launch is really just the beginning for all of us. What do you see as the network's immediate next steps, and what milestones should we look for in the very near future?
Yes, two things. One, I mentioned that we're growing to 200 and capping it at about that size across the markets in which the Institute does work. So this is intended to be a global collaborative. We have been in Singapore with our Asia Summit this year. We will be in the Middle East at in December. We will be in London representing our European office there. And then we'll just continue this tour around the world. So our immediate next steps is to ensure that we have this global representation, because women's health is not a North American unique issue. It is really an issue that women all over the world are facing. The contexts are local and are slightly different, but the overall challenges that we've been talking about underinvestment and under research and lack of innovation, those are global issues. And so we're going to ensure that we have all of these represented in this initiative that we need to. Our second focus is to launch these working groups. We really need to look under the hood and understand what are these sets of challenges that we're hearing about. They're not just anecdotal. I mean, these are realized challenges that impact the opportunities for investment, and really start to create some solutions, some best practices, as we have done time and time again and other initiatives that we have. And through those efforts, and I know that we'll make some progress there, but again, it takes all of us to be involved in order to do so. The next thing that folks can look for, an announcement around the Catalytic Investment Fund that will be aligned with our global conference in May of 2026. You heard in the last panel, we are certainly hearing investment is absolutely critical. I talked about that one researcher that I had a conversation with that said, if only I can get a de-risk investment that's not looking for a rate of return that is beyond where I am with my innovation, that would be amazing. And that's exactly the gap that we're hoping to fill. So May 2026 is a great time for us to, as we're doing our fund and designing this Catalytic Investment Fund, to announce that size, but also the opportunities for those kinds of innovators to begin to apply. But we're just at the beginning of all of these collective efforts. We are creating a platform, we're leveraging all of the places that we are as an institute. But my call to action for all of us is that let's share data. Let's be part of collaborative research platforms. Let's not move only at the speed of our own organization. Let's join these collective efforts, and certainly the work that you're doing. WHAM is part of all of that you've been doing for a long period of time, and we're going to do that. And those that are convening space, we're excited about working with them, but we're even more excited about rolling up our sleeves and getting to work, and excited that we have partners really all over the world that are joining us in this effort.
Well, a huge amount of gratitude to you, Esther, and the Institute for the support that you're giving to this new initiative, and obviously eager to drive our partnership to great new heights, and motivated by the opportunity to work obviously closely with you to drive this network and tap the extraordinary resources that not only the Institute has, but that WHAM and everyone on this call can bring. So thank you again for all that you're doing, and really very appreciative, looking forward to more.
Thank you so much, Carolee.
So let's now hear from some of our thought leaders on why now is such a critical moment for women's health.
Every woman deserves answers, but today, women's health research is under attack.
Right now, NIH funding is in a very challenging moment. Every delay doesn't just slow science. It sets back the return on investment for interventions that could save lives, reduce suffering, and lower healthcare costs.
By uncovering how biological sex influences disease, we can ensure that future therapies can serve everyone effectively.
If we lose that information about how to keep the majority of the population stronger, innovative, and most effective throughout our longer lifespans, it is at a tremendous cost to the American economy and our families.
The reality is these cuts don't affect just scientists, they affect you, your mother, sister, partner, your loved ones who may never receive the personalized, sex-specific treatments they need and deserve.
We must demand that women's health is protected, funded, and prioritized, because women's health matters to all of us.
As I mentioned earlier, WHAM launched the 2025 Edge Awards to help close the historic funding gaps and support the early stage investigators who Hadeen referred to so eloquently, and whose work can basically reshape the future of women's health. This effort has been guided by WHAM's Chief Scientific Officer, Dr. Anila Jayasuriya, who brings a rare dual lens to the work, the rigor of a scientist and the discipline of an investor. She understands exactly what it takes to move exciting ideas, as does Alice, from early discovery to meaningful impact. And she's been instrumental in shaping a portfolio of awards that reflects both scientific excellence and real-world potential. Today, Alice and Anila, in my mind, are so glued together. Anila will lead a conversation with members of WHAM's Scientific Advisory Board on why early stage funding is so critical, what breakthroughs are emerging, and how this year's Edge awardees are pushing the field forward. So thank you all for all that you've ever done, Anila, for WHAM, for the relationship, collaboration, but mostly the friendship that we've been able to create over this many years since WHAM was created with you at the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolee. And I'm flattered that you fuse Alice and me. We are close friends and work together very closely. It's a lovely fusion. Today, I want to talk to you about research. And you've heard that research is very important. You've heard that it's under siege. And I want to also explain the role of research in the whole ecosystem of women's health. So it is the basic underpinning, the lifeblood, if you will, of everything else that follows. Without research, we cannot start to invest in, create companies, and create products and services and treatments for women. And this is a very, very important part. And WHAM is multifaceted. WHAM builds awareness, convenes, is a thought leader, does reports, and funds research. And this is the juncture in the program where we're going to discuss WHAM's role in research. And in the way we look at research, as you've heard before, we look at the definition of women's health as being what I call the big tent. So it is reproductive health is a part of it, but it's much more than that. So the 5 areas that we're looking at in these research awards are brain health, female cancers, heart health, autoimmune health, and we added a 5th category called novel ideas and innovations and platforms. So what WHAM does is that it seeks requests for proposals submission from the WHAM collaboration, and these academic institutions, and we are particularly focused on people who are early in their careers. Again, a really, really important part, because those are the people who have the hardest time getting grants these days, and that's our pipeline. Those are the people we want to nurture. This year, we had more applications than ever. We got over 30 applications. There were a few that didn't quite fit our mandate. We had 29 finalists. And frankly, we had quite a tough time trying to decide how to pick 10 out of that 29. And in a little bit, you'll hear from our panel, and the people on our panel are academic leaders who were part of the people selecting the people who we chose as being awardees. And I'd like you to pay attention to the diversity of the manifestations of women's health. Classically, we've thought only about reproductive health and women's reproductive health, but it's far more than that. It is practically every aspect of a woman's life, and you'll see that reflected in the awards. And what we have asked for in selecting these awards is that the applicants highlight how targeting early stage funding and rigorous sex-based design is foundational to advancing women's health. So with that background, may I please invite the panelists, Dr. Nikki Wojtowicz, Dr. Alison McGregor, and Dr. Pamela Moali. Hello, everybody. I'm delighted to be here and to welcome you to this panel. I'd like to ask you, each of you, by the way, I'm not going to ask each of you every question of each of you, because that gets a little bit tedious, but let me, on this framing question, maybe each of you can introduce yourselves very quickly, and then we can get to the role of WHAM and the WHAM grants. So let me look to you, Pam. Would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, I'm Pamela Moali. I'm an OBGYN pelvic reconstructive surgeon and a physician scientist. I currently serve in 3 interconnected roles. I'm director of the Division of Urogynecology and Reconstructive Pelvic Surgery, director of the Translational Research Laboratories in Urogynecology, and I'm the executive director of the McGee Women's Research Institute, which is one of the largest freestanding research institutes solely dedicated to women's health. And so across these roles, my work centers on a single mission, which is closing the gap between scientific discovery and the real world problems that women face across the lifespan every day. So clinically, I care for women with pelvic floor disorders that dramatically affect quality of life, but they've really been historically underfunded and understudied. So what I've done as division director is I've expanded our surgical and research footprint across Western Pennsylvania, especially in underserved areas in Appalachia, where we are now affording women access to cutting-edge clinical trials and innovative therapies. In my laboratory, I lead a multidisciplinary program focused on understanding how pregnancy, aging, and biomaterials interact with the vaginal microenvironment and on engineering safer and more effective solutions for pelvic organ prolapse. Our work spans the full translational spectrum from mechanical biology to immunology, regenerative biomaterials, large animal models, and human explant studies. So I often say that start at the bench, but never forget the bedside, and much of our science is directly informed by the patients I treat. As executive director of the McGee Women's Research Institute, I now have the privilege of shaping a broader ecosystem that supports women's health innovation. So my focus has really been on building the pipelines that women's health has never really truly had. Pipelines that help early high-risk ideas survive, in the same with the spirit or congruent with the spirit of WHAM, and that integrate clinicians and sciences so the right questions are being asked, and that welcome private, philanthropic, and federal partners who believe that women's health deserves real investment in serious discovery.
Thank you. And Allison.
Great. Yes, thank you. And thank you for having me. Speaking of the bedside, I just left my 7 to 3 p.m. shift in the emergency department. So I ran over. Thank God my office is next to the hospital. So here I am. And I can tell you firsthand that we still have a lot of work to do. So I am Allison McGregor, and I'm a professor of emergency medicine. I am currently the Associate Dean of Faculty Affairs and Development at the University of South Carolina School of Medicine, Greenville. I got into this, field 20 years ago when I really started to see that there was a gap in care for women. Women were less likely to be diagnosed, less likely to be treated. Since then, I have really focused on the research to try to prove that this is exactly what that's my hypothesis. Since then, I developed the first division of sex and gender in emergency medicine at Brown University that came with fellowship programs, brand new novel electives for medical students, for residents, really sort of created this and built something that was the first in my specialty. Since I've been at the University of South Carolina for about 3.5 years now, I've really duplicated that in a much shorter time frame. So already, if you have leadership and you have the ability and access to support, this can be done. So already we have an NIH grant for faculty development, we have an elective for medical students, and we have fellowships for research and for emergency medicine physicians. And I think that what I focus on now is the fact that so much good research is being done by really brilliant people. How do we get that translated to the patient at the bedside? And I think that's the critical problem, because that just takes such a long time. So I really focus now on making sure that the faculty, both the basic science faculty and the clinical faculty, are educated and aware enough so that they can then teach the students or residents and implement this amazing science into their clinical practice. So I'm always happy to be involved in WHAM. And so thank you.
Thank you. And Nikki.
Thank you so much for having me this afternoon. I'm delighted to be with my colleagues on this panel. My name is Nikki Wojtowicz, and I'm the Executive Director of Northwestern University's Clinical and Translational Sciences Institute, or NUCATS. I am also a Research Associate Professor in the Department of Medical Social Sciences here in our Feinberg School of Medicine. I'm a biochemist by training, and I have transitioned my work from being at the bench, working with animal models and really seeing firsthand what we talked about a little bit earlier today, how really historically females were excluded from biomedical research, and taking that information and shaping what is my research today, which is the science of biomedical science. I study how the people, practices, and policies that shape the biomedical research enterprise, and I study how they can be made better and how we can improve them in order to make sure that research benefits all people. And so a big part of my portfolio looks at the underrepresentation of women as members of the biomedical research institutions that we are a part of, and how there might be a link to how women are understudied and underreported in our research. And it's quite an inextricable link between the two. So I'm delighted to join you all this afternoon, and I look forward to our conversation.
Well, all three of you and several others were part of the people judging and also recommending submitting proposals. May I ask you, Allison, what was that process like for you? What was your impression of the many proposals you looked at, and how do you think of this effort, WHAM's effort, in the larger context?
I was thrilled to see so many. I was thrilled to learn that I had a lot of work to do. So that was really wonderful to see how many submissions and how they sort of were so unique. I think one of the first things we had to really discuss as a group was, are we focusing on something particular? Are we focusing on something that's very quickly translatable? Or are we focusing on something that's innovative, or something that's really basic science to get it started? And the answer I think we came to collectively was yes. We will support all of the above, especially since I heard a little bit from the previous panel. Lack of funding is really essential. And I think in some of our prep calls, we discussed this, not just in politics and government funding, but really what I'm experiencing now is even in academics, there's less funding for research. And that has to do with the whole evolution of how strong the healthcare system is becoming in sort of the traditional academic milieu. And so everything matters. And I think that in order for us to make sure that we have the next generation that has been doing what we've been doing, I always say that, I want to make sure that I become irrelevant. That would be amazing, because then that means we've really created some wonderful science and wonderful researchers. And so it was really very interesting, and I loved our discussions about each one. And I think this is just a critical piece to help fund our scientists.
Nikki, could you talk about publishing bias and the hurdles in women's health, and in that context, how especially young scientists who are researching big problems in women's health, what kind of fortitude perhaps they might have to have so that they get their articles funded, and somewhere in there squeeze in what you thought about the 29 uplifting proposals.
So I think I'll start with the second part, and then we'll go to the publishing topic. So I'm really proud to be a part of WHAM because I think this is a really great opportunity to invest in early career investigators, as we've heard repeatedly today, at a time when funding is scarce. And the risks of pursuing innovative science are very high when such funds are limited. They're high in general, but now even more so. And so without these opportunities, such as the Edge Awards, we risk losing talented researchers who could really transform women's health. So supporting them strengthens the entire research ecosystem by fostering innovation and ensuring that we have diverse perspectives in science. And so then speaking about publications, that's the old saying, publish or perish. That is our economy. In terms of the biomedical enterprise, especially in academia, that we are trained to conduct research and make sure that we can disseminate it through peer-reviewed publications. But in order to take our work from the bench to the bedside to publications, this requires funding, and it is highly competitive. So we are in a very competitive environment where even small amounts of funding can help an investigator really get a research project over the finish line. And so I think this is why it's critical for this support, particularly those who may be at risk of choosing another career pathway at this time point because funding is just so tight.
Thank you. And Pam, could you talk about what you learned about women's health in medical school?
What did I learn about women's health in medical school? Yeah, that's actually what brought me into
I'm
women's
obliquely
health.
trying to elicit. I'm
Yeah,
obliquely trying to elicit the fact that we learned very little.
Yeah, so I was in the medical scientist training program at Northwestern, Nikki. I was at Northwestern, and a great academic center. I was studying molecular oncology, and really the gender gap became very apparent to me as a medical student. I just couldn't believe how many times I would ask a question related to a disease that disproportionately or differently impacted women, and I was just, we don't know. And then just being part of clinical trials and seeing that it was mostly men that were enrolled, and they wouldn't enroll pregnant women. So it really drove my decision to do this for a living at that time. It was the reason I came to Pittsburgh because, way back then, the CEO of the hospital had the foresight to say, we're not going to advance medicine unless we do research, or we're not going to advance women's health. So she was the CEO of this private women's hospital and founded the McGee Women's Research Institute. So it's why I came here. And I, chose OBGYN thinking this is a field in which I can be face-to-face with women and understand the unmet needs and be able to define them. And when I decided to do that, my mentors were just like, you can't go into OBGYN. It's completely unacademic. You're not going to get anywhere. And so that made me even more determined. And so here I am today. I think that, Allison's references to the pipeline are critically important, that we have to get in front of medical students and PhD students early because they have the same biases we do. Everybody has the same biases that they want to go into the cool things, and that women's health is just not a cool topic yet. So I'm really working on that. I developed a course for, that I tried to get funding for as well, but it's an MDMS in women's health innovation. So how we can really, it's a combined effort between the schools of medicine, biomedical engineering, and then business. So these students not only learn how to develop a product, but they know how to do the elevator pitch, raise funds, and all that stuff. So, I think we're at an exciting time. I think the current students are they've had it. They're so sick of saying we don't know, that they really are kind of building this momentum, and that, hopefully we pave the path for them. That's what I like to think.
Allison, as a emergency room physician, what are some of the biggest barriers and misconceptions that face women coming to the ER seeking emergent care?
That's really interesting because I think it's changed. So when I went to residency and I was a junior attending and I'm seeing patients, I am relying upon pattern recognition. So things I was taught in medical school, my attendings, I'm trying to emulate them. And so it was a constant, that's really all we had, memorizing. Now, the residents and students that I work with are all using clinical decision tools. So they are using things that have been validated. Is this a stroke? Check this box on age, risk factors. Is this a heart attack? Should I rule out a blood clot? There's a lot of decision-making calculations that they're relying upon, and really thinking that this is the evidence that they're gonna learn, and that by calculating it, it's going to be okay. But when you look into that, the studies that they've used to create those decision-making tools, are biased because they don't have men in them. And so I see that sort of shift where there's a lack of awareness of like what's underneath that decision-making tool, what evidence was used to create a hospital-based guideline or a clinical practice guideline. I know that some of us are part of a separate research WHAM group looking at clinical practice guidelines, either in lung cancer screening, which young women are now more and more likely to get lung cancer, but they're not part of the screening guidelines. Alzheimer's, much more common in women. None of the guidelines, include any of their things. So I really think some of the major things are what are we using to take care of the patients, treat them, decision-making processes as well. And then just very quickly, the other part is the advocacy, I think, is really critical. It's one of the things I always do is, a patient, especially female, will say, oh, I'm sorry, I looked at, I Googled this. And I was like, no, please, let's discuss what you found out. Let me, really sort of make sure that I address those things. So I think making sure that they're their own advocate or bringing their own advocate, I'm starting to see a trend, a little bit more of that, more conversation with women. Usually it starts with an apology because, a lot of times it's like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm being a pain. And so I always try to really, reassure them that this is what I want. And so I think some of those, the first one is kind of challenging. The second part is reassuring.
Thank you for that. And Nikki, in the same vein, the biases maybe in AI, what do you think that AI could contribute to women's health? It's a big, vast question. Just give me 1 or 2 points. And also the detractors, potential biases and detractors.
So I think that's a great question. And with great promise, there comes great risk with AI. I think we're hearing this same conversation around AI in multiple spheres. So I think what AI can leverage is our ability to look at data that we haven't been able to look at en masse before. So particularly gaining clinical insights from EMR records, using that clinical information to identify maybe perhaps some of the patterns that Allison was mentioning, but at a large scale in helping us identify some of the gaps in women's health, particularly where we can identify new opportunities for treatment. That's just one snippet or one thought. Also, I could talk at length more about drug discovery and how we might be able to use it to leverage it there on more of a bench-based perspective. But again, who's creating the models for AI? What data are they being trained on? So if you think about the tech space, again, a more male-dominated field, and who is our computer science majors? Who are the engineers going into these? I think we're going to see the same problems we saw at the bench, that when we have a very male-dominated workforce and we have our own particular biases, everyone does. But if we're not considering the perspective of women's health in building these, in training these models, I think we're going to see these models will perpetuate biases that have existed, just like in the clinical guidelines, after being developed over decades of research based on male studies.
Well, thank you very much, panel. You've both highlighted the ways that you see things similarly and also the diversity of the universe of women's health. We could talk for a very long time, but I am endeavoring to keep on time. So I'm sure that there will be questions. In fact, this is the segue into the section on audience questions, if there are any. And I think that Mariana is going to tell us if there are questions. If not, I can ask you guys questions for another minute, which I would greatly enjoy. Do we have any audience questions that are pressing? I am not seeing anything. So, okay. So let me ask each of you about WHAM and the Edge Awards in particular. Could you give a sentence in your own words about why you think this effort is so valuable, especially in today's context, and something about these young women and men to whom we have awarded these grants, and how it might affect their careers? Nikki.
Sorry.
Oh, do you want to go ahead, Pam?
No, either way is fine.
I think these funds not only accelerate our ability to do really fantastic research, but strengthen the pipeline of early career investigators and helping to create lifelong careers that are dedicated to advancing women's health.
Yeah, and I think in the current environment, I think every time I have a faculty meeting and we talk about a new executive order or a government shutdown, further delay in notice of awards, I constantly have to preach resilience, and this provides an outlet. This provides hope for these young scientists. Getting an award like this is a huge privilege, and it's just a unspeakable opportunity. The amount of hope and enthusiasm that it gives to the young scientists that earn these. I mean, you're going to change entire career trajectories as a result.
Alison.
Yes, exactly. And I think what Pam just said too, and what the last panel ended on was optimism. I think that is critical for us to, continue to weather whatever this storm is, because inevitably this is science, and that will win out. And it's just wonderful to see so many new scientists really take this as their calling, and just having one funding of a research really does just like start the whole trajectory. So I'm so grateful to the WHAM and to this funding for Stein's.
And I think it's wonderful to have a group of mostly women, but absolutely welcome men, funding these awards. It's different to have the government or other entities whose job or mission it is to do this, but this is a organic group that has come together and is sort of taking the leadership in citizen awards or citizen funded awards to scientists. So on that note, I think we transition to the video of our awardees. And we've been saying the awards are small, but I want to emphasize that we have $250,000 in research funding for 10 young scientists. And it is, I think, extremely meaningful. So those of you who have been very generous and have donated and given their time and money to these awards, I think that you will be pleased by what you see.
Human brain responds and transforms during gestation itself remains virtually unknown. To fill this gap, our project is leveraging 25 years of existing clinical brain imaging data to map the brain over pregnancy and postpartum in thousands of women. I'm so thankful to have received a WHAM Edge Award to support this ambitious and timely project.
Women's health broadly and pelvic floor muscle dysfunction specifically are severely understudied. We have few good options to enhance recovery after childbirth.
The WHAM Edge Award will help us facilitate the development of a novel treatment to support the function and integrity of pelvic floor muscle and ultimately women's overall health after childbirth.
My work will study how the immune system contributes to endometriosis, a very common but still poorly understood disease that affects up to 1 out of 10 women in reproductive age worldwide.
PCOS is a condition that impacts up to 20% of reproductive age females, including myself. I now know that this condition is also associated with changes in the brain and cognitive functioning. We don't yet understand the drivers of these cognitive problems in PCOS, which is where my research comes in.
In this project, I'll be focusing on triple-negative breast cancer. Very honored to receive the WHAM Edge Award and to use the support to help drive progress towards safer, more effective treatments for cancer for women.
Thank you so very much to WHAM for awarding our laboratory the WHAM Edge Award this year. We will be using digital medicine and AI-based tools to predict effective drug combinations for female patients and understand how 2 X chromosomes in females can cause differences in drug responses for males. So the impact here is profound. More precise treatments can mean better outcomes, fewer side effects, and lives saved, especially for women.
Women's biology has been largely underrepresented in colon cancer research. And indeed, most of what we know actually comes from studies in men. This award is important as it enables me to fill a knowledge gap related to women's biology during colon cancer, especially after menopause.
Ovarian aging affects every woman, yet we still don't fully understand why it happens or how to reverse it. We hope to open the door to new interventions that extend reproductive lifespan, delay menopause, and improve overall health and quality of life for women.
I am so excited to be working with Women's Health Access Matters on my current project, which is a study of sex differences in pulmonary embolism diagnostics. The goal of this work is to increase the efficiency of the workflow for women and decrease unnecessary testing that can have harmful side effects.
By better understanding the complexity of menopause, we can move towards safer, more personalized hormone therapy strategies, and ultimately better prevention approaches for women at risk for Alzheimer's disease.
I think I can speak for my fellow panelists and also for all the judges and the WHAM community to say that we were very impressed and pleased and encouraged by the applicants and their proposals and how innovative they are. And this has been, I've been honored to be part of this. Thank you, WHAM.
Well, thank you, Angela, and to our incredible panel. It means so much to me to acknowledge the level and amount of work that all of you have put into making this so successful. We've had close to 800 people sign up for today, and as I mentioned, we originally thought we had raised $250,000, but we actually have raised $300,000. Our hope is to get to $500,000, which I hope we'll do before the end of the year. So this process wouldn't have been possible without your commitment and the knowledgeable assessment that you brought to so many of the submissions, and we're very grateful. Thank you. In 2024, WHAM turns its attention to investing in companies focused on the health of women, recognizing that only 2% of VC dollars are allocated to women. We partnered with KPMG to quantify this opportunity in women's health, releasing the first WHAM investment report in January 2025 at JP Morgan. We showed that companies focused on women's health represent one of the fastest growing, most undercapitalized markets in healthcare. And in January 2026, WHAM and KPMG will again release a comprehensive update that brings together real-world company data, market trends, and insights from across our collaboratives to map where the biggest opportunities lie. Ash Shahada has helped shape that initial work during this time as KPMG's national sector lead for healthcare and life sciences. Ash brings more than 25 years of experience analyzing healthcare markets and advising on growth opportunities in the private equity sector, which he is now involved with to continue to inform this effort. So today I've invited Ash to share his perspective on the impact of this work because We only started a few years ago, and it has become quite a ride. So thank you, Ash, for your commitment to WHAM and for your great support.
Thank you, Carolee, and it's always a pleasure to be with you all today. And what a fantastic day of energy and enthusiasm, and like you just said, optimism. So I definitely want to start my discussion with you on that note today.
Well, I appreciate that. And as an entrepreneur, one is always an optimist. So you know that you have found one. You and KPMG have been an incredible partner to help us build the business case for investing in women's health. And early on, I wondered how from your perspective, how did the WHAM report and our collaboration influence the way you thought about women's health as a driver of value across the entire healthcare ecosystem? And what does the data right now tell us about where this market is heading?
I think it's a fantastic question. And, when we look at kind of the commercial aspects of when we make a decision to invest in resources and people and capabilities, women's health was a very clear leader for us. I mean, we chose to invest in women's health and mental health, two areas that are very important to our employees and our employee base. It's important for our brand and also important for how we recruit and retain our workforce. So as a commercial, leader in these organizations, you're going to see that across the board, whether it's KPMG, any of the other big four, certainly a lot of the new large entrants into the space, and also innovators. But the key moment for us on the research was when we helped kind of create a new definition for women's health. And it wasn't just women's health tied to reproductive health, but it was really about broadening the definition to include overall health and overall health opportunities. And that really unlocked the business value and the potential for the investment that we're so excited about. When you look at, 95% of the opportunity is actually things like autoimmune and Alzheimer's, certainly the areas around neurology and cardiometabolic disease. These are areas of immense value to the industry and immense opportunity, and more importantly, immense value to women in their lifestyle and their quality of life. So to me, that was really one of the early findings of this. And we actually started to put numbers against it. We started to break down this $41 billion healthcare market. And we started to really use the definition of, how it affects women exclusively, disproportionately, and differently, and starting to align all of the resources we've seen in the industry. So we started to highlight organizations like Aura, even, KPMG had a big relationship with Maven Health. So we started to actually see the companies and the organizations that we were contracting with through the research lens that we worked with you on, Carolee. So it was very impactful, very quickly. And I would just say, we were at JP Morgan together very close to this time last year. And the energy and the enthusiasm and the coverage, we were in Forbes together, we were in Fortune, everybody filled the rooms, and there were several meetings about this topic. So I would say, Carolee, sometimes it's about timing. And I know last year I felt like the timing was there, the moment has arrived, and the business case was there to start backing it up.
Well, thank you. I totally agree. And I'm really counting on this year even being more explosive. And some of the data points that you referred to, where we graphically showed, for example, that only 5% of conditions affecting women are gynecological in nature. That leaves 95% opportunity. And we graphically point to data in that report that I think shares in a very compelling way what the opportunities are. That report really quantified what most of us have known all along, which is that investing in women's health isn't just good medicine, it's smart economics. And I think I'd like to ask you, what findings or reactions most surprised you, other than the 5 and 95, where you view where the biggest opportunities will lie in the coming year?
I think the one area that we really start to see is that women's health is starting to become a very good investment for some of these startup organizations. And to me, that was one of the areas that we wanted to show, because I would say coming out of that meeting that we had at JP Morgan, I probably had about 15 meetings with a variety of PE funds. And all of them are running analytics right now on where the opportunities were. Now, there were a lot of reasons why maybe the market slowed down last year, and a lot of it wasn't necessarily due to the enthusiasm and energy. There was obviously kind of a delay in some of the capital pricing models we've seen because of interest rates, certainly the international and global uncertainty, certainly all the changes we've seen around tariffs. But I would say this has remained one of those areas of interest because the numbers are starting to kind of demonstrate really strong value. And especially in areas as we look at things like retail and consumer health, some of the new areas around research and some of the genomics research that are really pointing the direction. And even I think you're starting to see more biopharma now get into it. So overall, that space is very active in reinvesting back into R&D. And I think you're going to start to see that the benefits of that come out on the other side of this because we're going to see more and more startups. So we are already seeing that deal advisory market this year start to swing positive for healthcare and life sciences. So even though before all of the market has started to move in the direction that we're hoping, we're already starting to see some early buds of it. So to me, those were all areas that we started to highlight in the report. We started to show directionally where we think there are good investments. And I think more importantly, the data is starting to prove it out. I'd also add one other area, and Carolee, you've been very early on this, that the whole private enterprise industry is starting to also kind of put that money back to work. And one of the reasons, as I retired from KPMG, I've kind of spent more of my time now in private equity, is imagine, we're going to start unleashing 401k investment dollars into PE funds. And those PE funds are going to start to demonstrate higher and higher, forced to be develop higher and higher returns for their investors. They're going to be looking for these outlets, and they're going to be looking for high quality investments. And they're also going to be in the private enterprise world, making decisions by which the founders are actually going to start to encourage and direct some of these funds into women's health. So those were really huge findings.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And private equity and other forms of private capital have, in fact, played huge roles in transforming healthcare. And what I find striking is that in 2024 alone, there were 14 exits for companies focused on diseases that exclusively affect women. And you talked about exclusively, differently, disproportionately, which is the definition that we all use, and including Hologic's $350 million acquisition of Gynesonics. And I think it was just a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, Blackstone and TPG announced their $18.3 billion acquisition of Hologic itself. So I think that is a powerful signal that private equity sees women's health as a future profitable, scalable growth market, which I think we're all very excited by. From your vantage point then, Ash, how do you assess these investments in women's health that can clearly help bring more sex-based innovations to market?
Well, I think there's some interesting things right now. We are at a really important timing point in this industry right now. And what I say by that is, it was interesting. I just got off of a long conversation around AI and kind of the movement toward AI. I think the industry is going to look for other ways to put its money to work in addition to AI. And so I think we want to be one of those strong alternatives right now, because if you think about it, a third of our GDP is going to AI. Well, 2/3 is still out there, and we have to make some really good, smart business decisions on where it goes. And I think everybody believes certainly the healthcare ecosystem is primed for that. It's primed for innovation, primed for investment. And I think when we start to really solidify the business case behind why we focus on women, you're going to see multiple returns. And that was one of the findings we saw, especially in some of the startup companies, when they were able to build products and solutions, direct them towards women, and actually create a consumption model that showed early adoption of these capabilities, whether it's through science, whether it's through product innovation, or even go to market. We're able to see much more sustainable returns. So I think we also have to get really smart about it because we're competing against dollars in the industry. And if we want to be that smart alternative when we look at healthcare funding, we want to be that alternative that also starts to see that money move into our sector. So I think that's why I'm kind of looking at this is a very important year to start to move this model. But we're going to need investors. We're going to need advocates. We're going to need the banking systems, as you've been working very hard, to get behind it. And I think it's going to take truly a collaborative, which is the other big finding. This was all about the collaboration that you've all created, Carolee. And this is how we're going to also differentiate ourselves in the future versus all the other opportunities to invest in the next year.
I so completely agree with you. And it's clear that we're at a turning point. And I don't want to hear about women being a niche market. We're not small men. We're not a niche market, as I've given some of the data points earlier. And it is a huge performance opportunity. What else do you think it will take to move from capital markets and cross-sector collaboration to really bring women's health as the next major success story in healthcare investment? Is there something that we're not doing that we need to? And looking ahead, What are you the most excited about for the next iteration of the WHAM report?
Well, I'd say there's kind of three things. I'll kind of wrap them up because they're really going to be important as we look at the next report. But the first one is to really start to, shout from the mountaintops the successes we've seen in the industry. And it's interesting because sometimes those successes get kind of clouded. And is it health tech? Is it business technology? Is it new go-to-markets? Everyone's looking for, the halo effect of some great innovation. But what we're actually seeing is a lot of innovators that are coming to the market. A lot of them are driving massive returns. A lot of them are starting to kind of return investments back to their founders in a very, very fast rate. So to me, the first thing we need to do is to start to tell that story consistently and broadly, and to make sure that not only bankers and financiers are getting behind it, private equity is getting behind it, and certainly private enterprise. So that would be the first part. And that's going to be, I think, one of the big highlights for the new report is telling these stories and amplifying it. The second one, I think, is we need to kind of lay a very clear vision on why the broader health market for women is going to be a sustainable market. Because, and I've talked to so many researchers over the years, and when I hear about the amazing things they're doing around cardiometabolic research, and they know, and you've all heard it today, and you hear it in all the convenings that you've had, that there are massive differences and opportunities to bring that science forward to impact the lives of women. I think we need to kind of arm the researchers to be able to do that, to get the funding they need, and to launch those appropriate clinical trials. The third area I think that's really important, and we've learned this certainly from some of the massive successful launches, especially with things like GLP drugs, real world evidence really does matter. And real world evidence drives amazing opportunities from a business perspective. Look at all of the cohort opportunities that we've seen from GLP drugs, and it hasn't even been studied fully when we look at the gender differences. So I would think the other area that we want to focus on is being able to demonstrate how real world evidence drives business value and drives enhanced investments. It isn't just launching the drug and commercializing. We all know it's now about payment, it's about efficacy, it's about the consumer acceptance. And I think you're starting to unlock those capabilities in the path forward. And then finally, the last one I'm probably most excited about is lining all of these opportunities up behind capital. Because we can do all these things, and we've done some amazing things. And Carolee, whether it's unleashing capital from our federal government, whether it's investing, whether it's showing how innovators can actually get access to capital, we've been so excited to hear how the awards, the WHAM Edge Awards have driven opportunities. But I think we really have to make a concerted effort to continue to drive capital. And I would also say with the success of your early fundraising, I think being able to maintain the mission of WHAM and to be able to grow that and continue to commercialize all of these capabilities is going to be so important. So whether it's the mission of WHAM or driving capital into the markets is going to be the key to the success of the continued success of WHAM.
Well, first of all, thank you immensely for all of the partnership, support, and collaboration that you've brought to us over the past couple of years. You know how much it means to us, as does the KPMG Foundation contributions. And so we're very grateful to you. And thank you immensely, for sharing the important update on the 2026 WHAM Investment Report and for your continuing collaboration with WHAM. I really look forward to sharing JPM again with you and to the future of the coming year. I know we'll have tremendous results. So thank you, Ash.
Thank you, Carolee, for your friendship and for so many of the leaders on this call. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. So I think, as you can see, results-driven partnerships are critical to WHAM's success, and WHAM's partnership with the Katz Institute for Women's Health at Northwell Health has been central to advancing our shared mission, because we both bring sex-based science, clinical insight, and real-world impact closer together. As part of that collaboration, I am so honored to be joined by Dr. Jill Conlon, who you heard earlier, Chief Medical Officer and Executive Vice President and Deputy Physician-in-Chief at Northwell Health. Throughout her leadership at Northwell, Jill has championed the importance of evidence, systems, and clinical practice working in concert. The very themes woven throughout today's discussions, she has the rare ability to synthesize and take complex conversations and translate them into clear next steps in a way that several of you have seen and is extraordinary. And so to crystallize the messaging from our program, which we've heard so many great ideas and concepts and thoughts, Jill will bring together the ideas, momentum, and opportunities that surface today. And she'll outline what it will take to accelerate women's health research, investment, and innovation from here. So I'm so appreciative, Jill, not only of our partnership, more importantly, of our friendship. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carolee, and thanks to everybody for being here. And I do have the unusual honor of synthesizing this all together and putting this into action. We are always so lucky to have this wealth of not only the expertise, but the personalities, the collegiality, and the friendship that does put this all together. But what did we hear today? Carolee started the afternoon always framing the why it matters, that women's health is everyone's health. And we're going to say this several times over. This is not a niche topic. This is not a niche market. This is health in general. We heard from Kat, this incredibly enthusiastic woman, writer, researcher, academic. The gap is systemic. We have to create better medicine for everyone, and the time is now. We cannot wait. We cannot wait to do this. The momentum is here. And then the panel that I sat on, the collaboration of finance, research, and health systems for care delivery. That is how we win. When we bring the collaborations together, that is the way we do this. And we are seeing this here today. And what we heard from that panel, from my panel, between the three of us, is that we can't rest. We have to look at the investments in research at every step, early, mid, late. We also heard some wonderful bits. Women's health is on the main stage. We're feeling it. It's true. It's real. It's everywhere. But it is a challenging environment from the financial standpoint. It is a challenging environment to exit. So there are people who are timid about the investment. But we have to have this, we have women's health is the gem to be uncovered. And that is what we have to tell the story. We have to support junior investigators, because we could see that with the lack of federal funding, what is happening across the country, we do not want to lose that generation of scientists that will make a difference. So we support the junior investigator. Small moves certainly matter. Then we heard a conversation between Esther Krofa from Milken and Carolee, and the message there certainly of de-risking the commercialization. This is not a niche market. Milken is signaling by creating these groups, by creating these funds, Milken is signaling the ecosystem that this, again, is a healthcare issue. Prioritize and invest. Make it a part of the everyday discussions. You just heard that from Ash. We have to scream this from the top of the mountain. We have the stories. We have the successes. We also have to share our data, collaborate, and join. Then we heard from the Edge Awards, our panel of researchers as the judges. We have to prioritize again and fund these early stage investigators. As we heard from Anula, the big tent of 5: brain, cancer, heart, autoimmune, and then novel ideas. We can say it and say it all the time. Those are the areas, amongst others, but that need to be emphasized. Emphasize the early stage funding, the sex-based differences, implement the science into clinical practice is what we heard again. The research, the funding, the healthcare implementation. We need to get in front of medical students. So I love this also, so that we have to make women's health cool, and we are making it cool. And the Edge Award winners, from brain health to PCOS to cancer to menopause, WHAM is investing in awards in the right areas. And then finally, the case for investing in women's health, as we have to say time and again, Ash and Carol Lee, it's a business case. It is smart economics. We have to invest in all phases. We have to get the data to improve. We have to see that private enterprise is starting to put that money to work and that the future is profitable, scalable markets. Bring more sex-based innovations to market. We are seeing it. We have to tell our stories. So that is the summary of today's events. I want to end with optimism, as we've heard woven throughout this entire day. It is a difficult time in healthcare. It's a difficult time in the world, but we need to have teams like this to bring it all together and shout from every place that we can do this. Continue the optimism. The successes are there. Thank you very much, Carolee, as always, for giving me the opportunity.
Well, now everyone understands why I've given you the opportunity, Jill, because I don't know anyone who can synthesize, assimilate, and coordinate information in the way that you do, and so concisely feed it back in a way that will resonate and stay in my mind. So I'm very grateful that you were able to join us at the beginning and at this wonderful ending to this amazing afternoon. Thank you very much for everything that you do and bring to WHAM, and of course, mostly for our friendship. So it's my moment just to thank everyone, all of the presentations, the speakers, whose insights obviously have contributed to this extraordinary day that each of you have joined us in a timely and essential mandate, really to shift our thinking about the health of women. I also want to recognize our incredible partners and collaborators, and to briefly acknowledge our promotion partners for sharing information about the WHAM Forum to their communities. As I said, we had close to 800 people signed up, which we could not fill a room with that number. So we're glad that and impressed with the reach that this kind of a program has. And following today's call, we'll share a recording, of course, in case you didn't get to hear it all. And so thank you again for supporting WHAM and for being part of the work that we do to accelerate research investment and innovation in women's health. I know that meaningful change doesn't come from operating like we have in the past. It comes from all of us working together to create the future that we want to see. And the future of women's health won't unfold on its own. It will only be shaped by the choices that we make today. So thank you for joining us today and in the future.
Thank you so much, Carolee.
Science to solve our biggest problems. Why would you want to even risk shutting out the ideas of half of your population to solve those problems?
Think about women's health. We need to think beyond the reproductive organs.
Women are more than half our population, but research on women's health has always been underfunded.
We owe women centuries of research.
Women's health funding is 1% globally. That is the number that's invested in the health of women globally. That's unacceptable.
We now have the power to reshape scientific research by leading with a sex-based lens. That shift demands investment into new research areas that have been underserved and understudied.
When 99.5% of all neuroscience research excludes matters of women's health, mysterious things stay that way.
Something about the menopausal experience can explain women's increased longevity. That's pretty damn cool.
Engineers can send a probe from Earth to a moving asteroid. Not only that, they circled the asteroid looking for the best place to land. And that was in 2020. Yet in 2024, we still can't look this far into a woman's abdomen and find a 1 millimeter tumor. So how is that even possible?
What is the economic impact if we were to accelerate research on women's health?
For the next year, ARPA-H will invest $100 million to fund life-changing research.
There's a huge opportunity to make a difference.
The challenge isn't a lot of the time that these solutions don't exist. More often than not, the solutions exist and they're not getting to market.
I think there's a lot of opportunity here as investors, as industry people to start asking these questions. Have you looked at sex-based differences in your data?
This needs to be a conversation where markets incentivize all entrepreneurs and innovators to get into the women's health space.
Oh, there's tremendous gaps still in women's health, which is why it's so attractive for investment and for researchers and for new companies to go into.
Something that I'm actually very excited about is the collaborative that WHAM has created of multi-billion-dollar funds to help drive investments in women's health.
Our whole country has a lot to gain from funding for women's health research. It isn't just women.
What if we set fire to the status quo? Demand better, broader data.
Study women.
It shouldn't be 30 more years, but it should be 3 years. And